Hello, and welcome to Basketball and Activism, a conversation with Tina Charles, presented by the Museum of the City of New York. I'm Sarah Seidman, the museum's Puffin Foundation Curator of Social Activism, and we are honored to be joined tonight by Tina Charles, New Yorker, award-winning basketball player, now for the Washington Mystics, and activist. She will be joined in conversation by Professor Theresa Runstedtler of American University. And I'd like to thank the Wnba and NBA for making this program possible, as well as the Puffin Foundation for their support of Activist New York and its associated programming, of which this event is a part. And in addition to Activist New York, this program is also presented with our current exhibition, City Game, Basketball in New York. The museum is closed for repairs right now, but we invite you to come back to check out both shows in person when we open again with social distancing measures and safety protocols. And we hope to see you at another one of our virtual programs. In the meantime, you can find out more information about upcoming events and access recordings of past events on our website, mcny.org. And you can also check out the Activist New York exhibition online at activistnewyork.mcny.org. Thank you to all who were able to donate for tonight's event. We truly appreciate your support at this uncertain time. Closed captioning will be available. You can enable it at the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions from the audience on Zoom, so you can send along any questions that you may have in the Q&A function. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Tina Charles is a two-time Olympic gold medalist, WNBA Rookie of the Year, 8-time All-WNBA, WNBA MVP, and 7-time All-Star. Amazing. Charles is also the founder of Hopey's Heart Foundation, dedicated to raising awareness of sudden cardiac arrest through the placement of automated external defibrillators. And her debut film, Charlie's Records, premiered in the 2019 Tribeca Film Festival. So the first-time filmmaker is trending to be as impactful as she is as a professional basketball player and philanthropist. Theresa Runstedtler is a scholar of African-American history whose research examines Black popular culture with a particular focus on the intersection of race, masculinity, labor, and sport. She is the author of Jack Johnson, Rebel Sojourner, Boxing in the Shadow of the Global Color Line, and she's currently writing a book tentatively titled Black Ball, the ABA, the Slam Dunk, and the Struggle for the Soul of Basketball in the 1970s. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and please join me in welcoming Tina and Theresa.
Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction, Sarah. And I have to admit, full disclosure, I'm fangirling a little bit right now. I feel very fortunate to be speaking with Tina Charles tonight. But before I get started, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thanks, Sarah, Francis, and Lillian of the museum for inviting me. And also thank you to Tina for giving us your time tonight. So without further ado, 2020 has been a really crazy year. And, you know, between the coronavirus pandemic, the lead up to the presidential election, I mean, even the inauguration, I think we've all had enough stress and turmoil over the past year. And for you, especially, Tina, as someone who has extrinsic asthma, which puts you at high risk for contracting COVID-19, you had to step back from playing ball after getting a medical waiver. So you weren't able to be physically present in that bubble. In fact, earlier this year, I saw you speak on a panel with my colleague at Penn State, Dr. Amira Rose Davis. And I recalled watching, I recalled this anecdote that you gave where you talked about remembering seeing your teammates on television explaining why they had decided to strike the game on August 26th. Because they wanted to bring more attention to the issue of police brutality in the immediate wake of the shooting of Jacob Blake. And I can imagine that for someone who has been so publicly outspoken over the years, that must have been a bit surreal to watch this all unfold from your home. So I guess my question is, despite being forced to be on the sidelines this year, how have you remained so active in social and political movements? And how do you think your efforts this year may have differed from your personal activism in the past? How did you change things up to meet the COVID reality that we're living in?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for having me. Sarah, thank you for such a warm welcome. And Theresa, I'm really looking forward to this interview with you. But to answer your question, I was able to stay engaged with the season, being that even though I was medically exempt, just because there's a responsibility with this platform that I'm on, playing in the WNBA and just making sure the youth knows that it's not just all about basketball, but just what you choose to advocate for. Back in 2016, we didn't have the full support of the WNBA when it came to Alton Sterling and Philando Castile and just advocating for Black lives. And so the fact that we had the arm of the WNBA and I was able to see, and they were able to wear Breonna Taylor on the back of their jerseys. We were able to honor the other women, which oftentimes fall at the wayside of being a part of the national conversation when it comes to police brutality. So for the WNBA to be able to partner with the African American Policy Forum and champion the Say Her Name campaign. I don't know who didn't want to watch and see what the WNBA players were going to go do next. I always say this phrase that, we're not the guest to the party, but we're the host of it. We always were on the forefront and in the front lines of just championing Black lives. And WNBA is made up of 80% of African American women. And it's going up. So, we have a duty and we have a job and we have a responsibility, regardless if you're playing or not, regardless if you're retired or not, to just always continue to stretch your voice for the voiceless and just do the right thing.
Yeah, and I mean, you all have also, over the past, 8 seasons, also donated your WNBA salary to charitable causes. So, when I think about someone who puts their money where their mouth is, you certainly fit that bill. And so, there's a way to do it in terms of representing in the media and also putting literally your money where your mouth is. And so, and at the same time, what's so interesting is that we often hear about what the men are doing. We hear about LeBron, we hear about what's going on in the NBA, and what they're doing to protest racial injustice. And I like the fact that you said, you not guests to the party, you're actually at the party, running the party. I think a lot of times women athletes are actually leading the way. But the media isn't always the best at highlighting that. They aren't always, really in tune with what women are doing as athletes to make, causes like police brutality and mass incarceration known to everyone. But it's getting better, but I think we have a long, long way to go. And I think back, I'm glad that you mentioned 2016. I think back to 2016, when you guys were all protesting before Colin Kaepernick even took a knee. And that's often completely erased from the conversation. And that summer, you guys were wearing, shirts that talked about having justice and accountability, and I'm remembering the links, right after the murder of Philando Castile, having that press conference and refusing to talk about anything other than the issue at hand. And of course, it spread all across the league. And I'm thinking of that moment. It was a really, beautiful moment. This is obviously in the wake of the league then turning to fine you guys for taking that stand. You accepting your Player of the Month award and publicly reaffirming, right, this commitment to supporting Black Lives Matter. And you even went a step further, criticizing the league for imposing those fines and calling on the WNBA to make racial justice just as important an issue as breast cancer awareness, right? And so really asking them to center these questions because, as you mentioned, the league is majority Black. It's Black women, and these are issues that all impact you guys. And certainly it was a risk, but the league actually listened, which was, to my mind, completely amazing, that you guys actually forced the hand of the league in that way. And now, fast forward to 2020, you all have continued to speak truth to power. And the NBA, how has the NBA been a leader in activism this past year? I'm thinking of the Senate race, if you want to talk a little bit about that, and some of the other initiatives that you guys have really taken charge with and made serious change with.
Yeah. Well, when it came to the NBA and just all that we were able to do with them, you spoke to the game that they decided to sit out on that day. When it came to Jacob Blake and what happened to him, we were just standing in solidarity with our brothers in the NBA. And again, for us, it wasn't anything. I believe it was just second nature. I was able to speak to the Washington Mystics, the players on that team, just how they were feeling and just the decision that they were weighing in on and which direction they wanted to go. And for me, with just everything they were doing that summer, it was only fitting, that we were going to take that stance. We were going to stand in solidarity. We were going to make sure that the issue at hand was what the focal point was and not just entertainment, because a lot of people are still in at home due to COVID. But that's what was of importance for us. And all it takes is just one person to make a difference. And so that's what we're just going to keep doing.
And were you involved at all in encouraging fans to, vote for Reverend Warnock and getting involved in that Senate race campaign? I've just found almost like the politics of refusal, deciding to not say Senator Loeffler's name as a way of, speaking truth back to power, by actually promoting her opponent in that Senate race, and then seeing the fruits of that labor come to be.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what gives me hope when I think about the future. It's just there's just a refusal to accept what is, and that's what it was for the Atlanta Dream, when she owns like 50% of that team, and that's what it became, like a snowball effect, as you mentioned, with the Minnesota Lynx. We're able to do at that press conference in 2016, and how it trickled down to the remainder of the players in the league, and that's the same thing with the stance Atlanta Dream took, and then what happened with the remainder of the league and the shirts that it was saying vote Warnock, all that was very promising, and they were definitely the biggest difference maker in just his seating and just the difference that you're seeing, and Warnock.
Yeah, and refusing to allow an owner to kind of grandstand and distance herself at the same time from what the league's embodying, because it's not convenient for her political career. I mean, it was just so powerful to see you guys stand collectively in that fashion and really help in that Senate runoff race.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say kudos to the Atlanta Dream and just the stance that they took, and just again a refusal to accept what is and believing that they can make a difference, that their voices will be heard. And it was just unbelievable to watch. It was a beautiful thing.
Great. Well, now, of course, this is an event for the Museum of the City of New York. So I have to ask a little bit about New York. I know that you're from Queens and you played for the Liberty for many years. How has growing up and then living in New York City, and I'm thinking of the schools, the courts, the tournaments, how has all of that New York vibe shaped your engagement with social movements?
I like to always say, I'm a New Yorker through and through, in the way that I talk and the way that I walk and the way that I handle things, the decision making that I make. Never giving up, always have to keep grinding, always have to keep pushing. So growing up in New York for me was just, it was a blessing, that grit that I have, fall in love with basketball, knowing this is where the mecca of basketball is. Growing up with my dream, aspiring to play in WNBA, growing up watching the New York Liberty and the New York Knicks, having been able to be blessed to play for the franchise, to be the hometown girl playing for the team. So I was very thankful. I was very fortunate just to be immersed in New York. And I always say, if you take care of New York, New York will always take care of you. And that's exactly how I feel moving forward with my career in DC.
Great. And obviously, and this is sort of getting back to some of the things that you guys have been going through over the years as you've chosen to take that sort of New York vibe and inject that, social justice bent into your career. Obviously, we're not all privy to the conversations that are behind the scenes between the players and their teammates, their partners, their families, their friends about speaking out and the possible risks that are involved with that. Can you give us a bit of the inside scoop? What was it like for you as a player, as you weighed your decisions about being involved in the various actions, whether it was as a rookie or as a star, and MVP, when it came to speaking out against racial injustice, how did you make those decisions? And can you talk us through that process?
I think naturally you become comfortable doing something because you've seen others before you do something. And for me, to see those other athletes be very vocal back in the day, your Muhammad Ali, Bill Russell, Tommy Smith, you can go on and on, John Carlos, like these individuals, they spoke up and there was change. And then you also have to realize you're not going to see the result if the work isn't put in. If we're not the ones who will probably see the result, but those after us will. And we have to continue to put confidence into those coming up behind us to make sure that they keep on using their voice, that they keep on advocating, because change will happen. Not when we want it, but it will happen. And that's what we've been seeing along the way. So again, you just have to just keep holding on to hope and just trusting the process of what's going on and the shape of and the outcome. And I think the best time to enforce change is when everyone is still. It's unfortunate the lives that has been taken during COVID, but it also forced people to really recognize what's going on in the world, what's going on around you, who's being impacted. And I think real change happens when those who are unaffected become just as affected as those that are affected. And that's what you're seeing. And that's why you're seeing the many different faces in the front lines that's actually starting to care about what's going on around them. So for me, to answer your question again, it's just those who came up before me, I've seen them put in the work, I've seen them use their voice, I've seen them advocate, and that's what gave me the confidence to do the same thing. You have to carry on, you have to keep it going.
Yeah, do you ever get a sense though that also because you are a Black woman playing professionally in a sport, and doing so is almost a political act in and of itself because, sport is so masculine. The money of sport traditionally has been white dominated, ownership, et cetera. I mean, obviously these things are changing now, but do you feel like you were less invested in the system, the athletic system, the league, in the sense that, there's less to lose, or I don't really mean that there's less to lose, but that you had a sense that your playing, wasn't being respected on the same level as, say, the men's leagues and whatnot, and that sort of gave you a little bit of an opening to continue to resist? Or do you think, do you feel like your experiences as a Black female athlete have impacted your desire to speak out or your willingness to speak out?
I think it depends on the individual. Obviously, I think any Black athlete, you're not just an athlete, but you're carrying what you have also the responsibility to have a platform. You have a responsibility that the other African American person next to you does not have through their average day-to-day job. So yes, I think it's twofold. Like, yes, I'm an athlete, one, but then I also have this platform and also have this responsibility that my other neighbor does not have when they get to go to their 9 to 5. So I do take on that responsibility, but I don't look at it as, I want to do this because I'm not getting the attention as an athlete. I do it because it's just my responsibility. It's the additional weight that we have to carry, that your other counterpart, your other Caucasian athlete does not have to carry. But it's something that I know is a responsibility. I know it's something that I have to do and that others have done before me, but I don't compare it because the recognition isn't there, just being a woman and as an athlete, I just know it's something that I have to do.
Yeah, and what has really struck me about the Wnba activism of late is just how collective you guys have been. It's not just one or two stars speaking out. Of course, you have somebody like Maya Moore, who you played with, who took a personal stand. But now it's like part of your collective identity as players. You forced the league in some senses to take on that identity as well, as a kind of league that is open to talking about racial injustice and other social movements. What do you think the basketball world and women's basketball in particular have to, show to other sports in terms of being activists and athletes at the same time? Um, do you feel that? Why do you think that those in the basketball world are or seem uniquely positioned to engage in activism? What is it about basketball that makes the players so outspoken in comparison to, say, some of the other professional leagues?
I think it also comes with the platform. I think the WNBA has come a long way. We're going into its 25th season, even though that's still, in comparison to the NBA, you wouldn't say like we're one of the oldest league, but compared to other women professional leagues, we're the longest lasting league that has been going on. So you can say we have the platform, we have the coverage, we have the likes of ESPN and CBS and ESPN2, and we have the networks that are covering us. So that definitely gives us that confidence to want to use our voice, to want to make sure that we are very much aware of what's going on and what other women professional sports do not have. It makes a big difference out there for teams and for the sports leagues.
And you guys were able to organize and have a union as well and have collective bargaining agreements. So that's a huge thing as well for women's sport. Do you think that impacts your ability to organize on more of a collective scale?
We have to be organized. I don't see, it's twofold. As WNBA players, we also have the opportunity to play overseas. So you have that opportunity in the off season. If you don't want to play in the WNBA between May and September, you can go overseas between October and May. So the fact that the WNBA is your dream, you want to play in front of your family, you want to play in front of your friends, you want to stay home, but then you also get to have this platform, also get to have this responsibility. And so the fact that the WNBA is organized, the fact that our CBA is progressively forcing change between the players and the league for the greater good of the players, that's what it's about. And the decisions that we made last year for the CBA is not gonna impact every single current 144 players. It's gonna impact the future generation. And that's what I'm most excited about, that they can believe that they can achieve the same things that we're doing today.
Yeah, I mean, the research that I'm doing now in the 1970s, looking back at the men's, the NBA when they were fighting against the reserve clause and, fighting against the 4-year rule, all of that stuff has now had huge impacts on, subsequent generations of players. And so I think you guys, even in terms of the higher salaries that you have managed to negotiate for and concessions for working moms. I mean, these are huge for women's sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Again, it just goes back to, kudos to Nneka Ogwumike and Terry Jackson, who's the head of our union, and Lasia Clarendon and Elizabeth Williams and Chiney Ogwumike. I could keep going down the line, but every single person heard what we needed, what we wanted moving forward, and we were able to get it done. We want to see this league continue to grow and go for another 25 years, God willing. So those were the steps that were drastically needed for it to happen, because we are mothers, and there are things that we need, and they were able to complete that.
Yeah, it's an amazing step, and I think it's going to set the stage for negotiations for other women's sports as well. So it's exciting to see. And I think, I'm going to go into my last question here before we open it up to the audience. But I think it's safe to say that you are certainly inspiring many young fans, especially young Black women, non-binary fans, to put aside their fears and really speak out against injustice and be part of what, Howard Bryant calls the heritage, that responsibility to speak out. And I'm also thinking of all of your media and philanthropic work off the court with 31 Enterprises, and how you've talked about your mission through 31 Enterprises is to really search for projects on unsung heroes. So in that vein, can you think of other moments in history, and you mentioned a few, Bill Russell and others, where basketball has really been a leader in advancing social movements and social justice causes? And what have you learned from that history? And who has inspired you to be who you are?
Who's inspired me to be who I am? It would have to be my former teammate, Maya Moore. Maya, when she stepped foot on campus at UConn, there was just a presence that she had, just being very God-fearing, being a Christian woman, having her beliefs, and just always being very vocal, and just her timing of when she would speak and when she would act. And that's someone who's really inspired me, just what she was able to do. It's very moving. It's very inspiring. That's who gives me confidence. That's who I always look to. That's who I always speak to. So for me, if we were talking about the time in basketball that was very transcending, it would have to be Maya, and just what she was able to do with her husband now, Jonathan. And just very happy for her and others out there who are advocating for what everything she did. It's just amazing. So I can't speak more about Maya, but it's definitely Maya Moore.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned that you also grew up watching the WNBA back in the day. Did those players also serve to inspire how you are as an athlete and an activist?
Growing up, you're not as knowledgeable of what's going on. So if I would say, the younger Tina, it would just be strictly basketball. I mean, there were players like Lisa Leslie, there was Swin Cash, there were the New York Liberty players. But back then I wasn't, really foresight as far as what's going on outside of me as a kid growing up, just trying to play basketball. But right now it would have to be my peers, I would have to say, and just what everyone that was in that bubble, what they were able to do.
Yeah. And going forward, I mean, how do you see the mix and the balance of social activism and the WNBA raising its profile and becoming an even bigger and better presence in the media scene? Do you think those two things can go together, profitability and also really being publicly open about a cause?
Yeah, I mean, we just seen them do it this, last summer, and it served us well. Everyone was still able to play. Everybody was still able to lock in on the game. And then when it was time to speak, we used opportunities during media timeout to raise awareness to what we wanted to. I think Holly Rowe of ESPN did a great job of giving us that platform as well. So I think it definitely does go hand in hand. And God willing, we don't have to keep talking about Black lives being killed by the police officers. But I just hope that the world knows that we'll be the voice for them if needed.
Yeah, and I'll end by saying your ratings for the league actually went up. I think it was 68%.
Right.
So to me, it proves that the audience is out there and they are hungry for athletes who won't just shut up and dribble. So I think you guys are certainly proving that in a big way. Even as the men's ratings have been falling, WNBA's ratings are up. So kudos to you guys for figuring out how to remain true to yourselves and also provide a great show for all of your fans.
Right, definitely. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to go to some audience questions. Okay, so we've got a question here about whether or not you could talk about a little bit more about your New York City upbringing and some of the spots in the city, the courts, the moments, the physical spaces that really shaped you as a person, and maybe even your time at Christ the King. Like, how did that shape you as a player and a socially aware player?
That's a loaded question. I think I'll just say, like I said, born and raised in Queens, New York, and I probably played on every every basketball court street in New York City during the summer times. And so for me, especially playing against the guys, that's what definitely gave me that grit, gave me that hunger to want to play. I wasn't always the first one picked when playing pickup in New York City. So I would always stay around and, do things just to make sure that I was always on top of my game. And Christ the King, when I got to Christ the King, it was just really fitting. I was very blessed and fortunate to be coached by Jill Cook and Bob Mackey, and to have the teammates that I had and the experience that I had, and those who came before me, your likes of Sue Bird and Shamika Holzclaw. That was definitely, seeing them go through Christ the King and where they ended up. That was definitely encouraging for me to want to do the same things they did and put in the same work. And following that, the rest was history. To be able to play for New York Liberty was a dream come true. And I'm just very thankful for my journey. That was a loaded question, but I hope I answered it.
No, that's great. I mean, it seems like New York is just a place where, anyone who lives in New York for any period of time just develops this kind of grit and perseverance. Just living in the city, brings that out in you. And, that saying, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. So if you can if you can get into the game in New York, you can get into the game in the WNBA.
Definitely. So I'm very thankful. Very thankful.
All right, so I'm just waiting on another audience question. Are there other questions from the audience? Questions for Tina Charles? Oh, okay, this is a very sweet one. Hi, Tina, we miss you in New York. We are big Liberty fans. Do you think there will be a time when women will not be compared to the men and regarded and respected in their own right? This is from Gail and Pat, who are diehard Liberty fans.
Yeah, I would have to say this all depends on the person and how you view us. I think that's always going to be a topic of conversation. I'm not really sure if it will end, just the way we view things. And people always say what's the difference between men's basketball and women's basketball, and I would always say, our style of play is different. We don't play above the rim. Our skill, the fundamentals, how we run plays all the way through, all of that. So I think there will always be a comparison. I'm not really sure if there won't be.
Great. So we have another question from Andrew Catalano. He was wondering, what would you say to those who misunderstand Kyrie Irving? Why does he seem to be so misunderstood?
I think everyone is their own person Kyrie, he's his own person. Everybody grows in their own way. Everybody does things their own way. When it comes to the men, they're always under a lot of scrutiny. They get a lot of coverage and the things that they do. I choose to judge not, and just appreciate the person and what they do and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it seems as if we have so many expectations for how athletes should be, how they should conduct themselves, how they should answer questions, and act on and off the court. And I think in some ways we often forget that athletes are humans as well, and that we can't, hold people to a certain mold that we think is appropriate, as opposed to who they are as a person. Okay, so I have another question here. How can the WNBA continue to promote social justice efforts while not coming across as trying to capitalize or make money off the movement?
I don't think the WNBA has even capitalized or tried to make money off of the movement. I think they partnered with us players and listened to what we wanted and what we wanted to advocate for, and you just have to keep taking advantage of this moment. As we've seen the moment with Reverend Warnock and in the Senate, I think that's very important. So just not losing the momentum, just keep having these conversations, keep driving the conversations of what the issues at hand still are, still is. So that's what's important.
Great. I have another question here from Polly. Who were your heroes or heroines growing up? What advice would you give to young athletes coming up now?
So my heroes meaning as an athlete or just in general, or?
Just in general, and what advice would you give to young athletes coming up now?
My hero growing up would be Rosa Parks. When I was growing up, and it was always February, and it was Black History Month, I would always do book reports on Rosa Parks. Really love what she did and what she stood for. And my advice that I would give athletes growing up, I would just say fall in love with whatever sport you're into for yourself, not for your parents, not for anyone else, but just really fall in love with it for yourself. Just to persevere and just to stay dedicated. Dreams don't have an expiration date, so that's something that I always keep in mind.
And in that vein, Lindsay asks, you do so much and all of it so well. How do you practice self-care while being an athlete and an activist? And I would add an entrepreneur. How do you keep all of those balls in the air?
Just, I think you do what's important. You do what you're passionate about and what you choose to make time for. And that's exactly what I do. I make sure I have the right people around me. I always take time for myself, always make time for myself, and speaking to self-care and mental health. And that's always what's important for me. Is just checking in with myself and just doing the things that are important and that will be long lasting. And being an entrepreneur, being a philanthropist, all those things are really important for me. And just to make sure that the youth knows that, again, it's not just all about putting the ball in the basket, but just the things that you do off the court and just your impressions on others.
Great. Well, that was our last question. So I want to thank you very much, Tina Charles, for joining us this evening and for answering all of our questions about the intersection of athletics and activism.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I just want to chime in to say thank you both again so much. You just packed like so much content into a brief but really inspiring conversation. So thank you both so much for your time and fielding those questions. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Stay warm.
Good night.
All right.
Good night, all.
Thanks.